At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Rainforests are home to half of all living animal and plant species on the planet, as well as 2/3 of all flowering plants. And since studying as a forest ecologist with Oxford and Plymouth universities, my special guest today, Cecilia Chavana-Bryant, has spent many hours studying up in the canopies of these incredible habitats, as well as managing international research teams in both tropical and temperate forests. Cecilia is currently working with UCL's Geography Department using cutting-edge terrestrial LiDAR scanning technology to analyse forests in brand new ways that help us better understand their function and importance globally. In this interview, we also delve into Cecilia's urban roots in Mexico. So let's go and meet her. Hi, Cecilia. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast.
Very happy to be here, Tom.
Thanks for welcoming me into your home and taking time out to have this chat. I think you're going to have so many things to tell us all about from your experiences in rainforests and working with trees. But I want to start with you and what trees mean to you.
That's a big question. Trees are a big part of my life. They have been since I was a child. They've always been there as refuges for me. I've never felt as happy as when I'm climbing a tree.
Tell me a bit more about that then. So where's that come from? Did you always live around trees?
Well, yes and no, because I'm from Mexico and I was raised in Monterrey, which is the second largest city in Mexico. It's a big urban sprawl. It's a big city. However, we did live in one of the few streets in our neighborhood that had trees in it. My mother actually chose the plot of land where she was going to build her house because there were trees there. And in Mexico, the area where Monterrey can be very, very hot in the summers. But they also had a very real value, a very real service to give us. So they provide shade. Our house was basically shaded by trees, and so it was always cooler. So trees, for me, I love them aesthetically speaking, because they're beautiful, but also because for me, it's always been since my childhood, it's been very real, the connection between the trees and our well-being as a family.
What kind of trees were those ones right by your house?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of trees they were. Sadly, when we moved away from there, they were cut down. I did try to go back, to see the trees precisely because of that question. Because when I was a kid, I didn't pay attention to species. And I was really sad to see that they'd gone.
So back then, they were just trees, right?
Yeah. They were just wonderful shade trees where I spent a lot of time. I loved climbing trees since I was very small. I went into the trees for a lot of reasons, just for enjoyment, but sometimes I got into trouble. And to get away from my mom's anger, I went and climbed trees, and trees have always provided a lot of comfort for me.
I think when we first met, you might have told me about going on a bus with your mum to see trees. Did I recall that right?
Yeah. So in the summers, when my nieces and nephew, three of them would come for the summers to stay with us, my mom just needed to get the kids out and get all that energy out. But we had no green spaces. Sadly, this is something that happens around the world. Neighborhoods that are the most humble, poor neighborhoods are so devoid of green areas. And then you go to the more wealthy neighborhoods and there's these wonderful parks, and each house has their own really good garden. So these parks are often empty because every family has a nice big garden to enjoy. We trekked. Sometimes we had to take like 2 or 3 buses and then walk for like a kilometer, which helped with the burning energy a bit for us children. But yeah, it was like an excursion to get to these green areas. And often we were the only ones there. And that is something that I feel very strongly about, that I think we should be doing a lot better. These communities are in such need of these green areas where you can, just decompress, to just breathe and have that contact with nature. And it's really sad that we should try to expand it more outside of these areas, to those neighborhoods where there is individual families don't have the resources themselves. So these communal green spaces are so, so important and so lacking in these neighborhoods, sadly.
It just feels like a basic right, doesn't it? And going back to that memory then, on going on the bus trips to see the trees, were you bored on the bus? Were they exciting journeys? And do you remember arriving there? What were the trees like?
It was all excitement. It was just, my mom it's a wonderful mom. So, she made the whole trip. It didn't feel like, to us, it must have been a task for her, having to deal with 4 children, very active children, to transfer us from bus to bus. It must have been stressful for her. But for us, that trip was part of it. We were just so looking forward to getting there, to the park, and just running around and, climb trees and all of that. And so, yeah, so that feeling has stayed with me, that feeling of, we're going to the forest, we're going to see trees, and that it's still exciting for me. I still have that excitement that I had as a child of, I'm arriving where there's trees, I'm going to visit trees. It's been there.
I guess that's also carried on into your career. So you've been around the world, really. You obviously were from Mexico and know some of the trees and forests there, but you've been to Australia, France, Brazil, Peru, to Rainforest, the Amazon. You've been to French Guyana, and also working here in the UK with ancient trees and one of our UK temperate rainforests. Mm-hmm. What a rich experience. How far has that taken you? Where have you ended up?
I mean, this is exactly my point when I said that, to make these resources to children everywhere. It's basically, for me, my tree climbing and my time spent in trees have basically given me a career, the career that I have today. It always remained as a wondrous thing, trees as a wonderful thing. And so it made me think further. Once I got older, it's like, so how? Why are they the shape they are? Why are there some that have big leaves and others have small leaves? Why some get much taller than others? It was just this passion for trees, all of these time spent with trees in my childhood that really turned into questions that I wanted answers for. I wanted to learn more about them, about these organisms that give so much, that give us the oxygen that we breathe, frankly.
There won't be many listeners that have been up in the canopy of a rainforest. And for that reason, I've got to ask you to take us up there, if you don't mind. Can you maybe chat us through the lead up to getting to the tree that you're going to climb? And when you're immersed in those places for a long time, do you kind of tune into the sounds of the rainforest? And are there any clues of danger?
Yeah, you do. It's rainforest can be, for a beginner, for somebody that hasn't experienced them, can be quite overwhelming. The cacophony of sounds of so many animals and rivers and wind, and there's a lot happening, and then and you have all of these sound, and then suddenly it all goes quiet. And normally that's when you normally know that there's a big predator around and everyone is paying attention. Everyone is just stops and just looks at what's happening. That's a very, very good clue that something big is around. But it's their space, so that's our responsibility to kind of be aware of them and give them space. Move yourself out of their way, basically. I mostly work with intact forests, and so there's very little in terms of paths. So you've got to think about you're carrying about 30 kilos of equipment on you. You have to have access ropes. The access ropes have to be about 100 meters long, and they are heavy. So I was trained by arborists to climb trees. So I use the arborist techniques for accessing and moving around the canopy. So there's a lot of people that just kind of go up and down. I didn't want that. I if as a child I moved around, if I'm going to have ropes, I'm going to go everywhere I can on that tree, There is a level of fitness that you need.
My 7-year-old daughter Daisy is learning about the layers of vegetation in the rainforest. Perhaps you can describe that. And then arriving at the top there, what can you see? How really special is that?
You see the forest. The ground level is, because of the canopy, is quite dark, enclosed canopies and tropical canopies. And then you get to the tree, you find the tree that you want to climb, and then you look really carefully, because not all trees are climbable. You have to look at ant nests, wasps' nests. I was repeat climbing because I was collecting leaves of different ages, right from the top of the tree all the way down to the lower part of the canopy. We had to be able to see what was going on. No bits where we couldn't see what was happening, because that's the danger is that you'll find a nest of something around there. But those are the things that you have to watch out for before even climbing, before sending a rope up or anything. So then you have to prepare the tree for climbing. So there's a whole, not a rope, but we use a special line in a big shot. It's basically a big, what are these, catapults?
Slingshot.
Yeah, slingshot. It's a huge one. You have to have very good aim, and so that takes quite some time. And so then finally you get your rope up there and you climb a tree. And one of the things that you start noticing definitely is the light level, how it just gets brighter as you go up and go up and go up. And it depends on the forest, what you go through. So there's forests where there's a lot of palms. So you'll leave the herbaceous level on the ground, whatever is growing on the ground. And then you start seeing palms, different shapes, different trees that are growing, seedlings that are on their way to get to the light. Everything is trying to get to the light in tropical forests. Light is a limited resource because the canopies are so dense. So you see all of these, the palms you go through, you hopefully don't get hurt by the palms. Some palms are quite vicious. They have very vicious spines and that. And so those, unfortunately, we do have to clip. And then once you get to that point where the access rope is, you catch your breath. You're carrying your body weight plus maybe 10 kilos of equipment. So it's hard work getting up there. In tropical forests, there are some big trees that get up to, I think 90 meters. I think the tallest tree in Malaysia that's been found. And so you catch your breath and then you just look around and it's all green and beautiful. And for me, that's where the forest is. The canopy, there is different life there. You have lizards just moving around. You have the monkeys. If you're in the Americas, there's plenty of monkeys going around, and some of them resent you being there. You have birds. You have different types of birds. You have the arboreal frogs, which are quite beautiful and normally quite poisonous too. But I just love being in the trees. It's just, you see the shapes and you start paying attention and you look at trees. And when you take time to look at their canopy and how they've arranged their display, their branching, you can kind of start looking, if you look very carefully, how the tree found the light. You can see like how one branch will move towards the light. Maybe there was a gap and it just filled that space. And you start seeing how trees conquer that space and to get to the light, and how they share, and how they, in the tropics, I sometimes think, temperate versus tropical forests. The temperate forests, trees are more, I call them polite. This is a completely human view of this, but because they don't invade each other's space so much. There's a little bit more spacing. Tropical trees, they don't do that. They fight over space. And then there's the lianas also that are kind of mixing everything up.
What's a liana?
A liana, it's a climber. they will use the tree, they will climb along the tree, like let's say an ivy, but on steroids, because these lianas can actually, they become woody as they grow. They actually can become like a small tree themselves. And so the lianas are also fighting for access to light, and they connect trees also. So yeah, you have to kind of work with lianas also.
And what are the most magical moments up there?
Oh gosh, I just love spending time up there. But I do remember in French Guiana one time, there was one of our trees and it was coming into flower. We had been looking, we were repeated sampling this tree, and we had been looking forward to the flower display because I'd never seen it myself. But what we hadn't anticipated is what other creatures would be attracted by the flower display. And so we got there that day, and it's like, oh, great. We didn't look up too much because, like I said, we've climbed these trees several times. So we didn't look too much, but we did see a little bit of buzzing around the tree. And I thought, oh, okay. Didn't pay much attention. There was some movement up there. So we climbed and climbed. By the time we got to kind of like the middle of the canopy, we were being bombarded by, I'm thinking in Spanish, hummingbirds. Chuparrosas is the word in Spanish. Yeah, hummingbirds were just everywhere. So they were feeding on the flowers. And a lot of people, because they're tiny little things and very dainty, delicate birds, a lot of people don't know that they're quite territorial. And so they were just bombing us, they were just flying. They were very annoyed by us invading their feeding space. And so that day I just decided we were not going to work. So we just sat there. We just put our instruments away, put everything away. And we just sat there and just tried to make ourselves as inconspicuous as we could and try to stay very still so we didn't annoy the hummingbirds too much. That was quite something. That was very, very special. We were just surrounded by hummingbirds, and it was just gorgeous.
Our rainforest is sometimes described as the lungs of the planet, and studies have shown how they can pretty much, in their local area or perhaps even globally, I think, they can really have an influence on the weather patterns. When you're up in the trees there, is that something you kind of have a sense of?
So yeah, I mean, the trees are themselves creating moisture, taking moisture and creating also. There's evapotranspiration. So the trees are also collecting water. The roots are absorbing water. I mean, they create their own environment, and so they keep water in the environment. They move moisture. I mean, they produce oxygen, of course. They absorb carbon dioxide. So they generate a whole environment where other plants can live. So yeah, they're very much altering their environment in many different ways.
They're kind of like the regulators.
Yeah.
One theory I've heard about the Amazon rainforest in particular is that over time and with climatic change on our planet, that it would have expanded and contracted perhaps several times over. And that may be one of the reasons why it hosts such a great diversity of different life forms, because as it expanded and contracted, they would have all gone into that area and lived and depended and sort of fought it out, I suppose, in there. And it must be such a wild place to experience, very different to, say, Plymouth, where we are today,
Yeah.
When you walk out the front door here, you haven't got the same kind of things to be aware of, sights, sounds. It must just be a whole different dimension, really. And then in amongst that, you've probably got some pretty significant predators too.
Yeah.
So tell me about the survival skills that you need in a place like that.
Well, it depends on the forest where you're working. For example, I recently went to Gabon. And so there we had to worry about a completely different set of animals that I never encountered, which is the forest elephant. To get used to that, you have to be careful because the matriarchs, if they have babies around and you run into them when you're walking towards your plot where you're going to be working, you have to be patient. They own the forests, and it did happen that we encountered a matriarch, a couple of them actually, and there was a baby, and we actually just ran into practically the baby elephant. And there you have to be with a park ranger because they know how to handle these encounters. Gorillas also, but then also it can be really the small things. You can be, wasps also. There's a lot of leeches in Australia. There'll be leeches. Those are anything that's trying to steal my blood, I don't like. So, the leeches are quite, and just when you have to grab them off you, and they're all slippery and it's, ugh. But hey, it's part of the experience. And, there's scorpions, there's snakes. But, everyone, they're not looking for, except for the bloodsuckers, they are looking for you. They're not going for you. You're not their aim. They're not. Yeah, so you just kind of just move around them. You share space. It's just that basic concept of sharing space. It's as simple as that. In Peru, actually, we had wild boar. And because we were working on a reserve, basically the wild boar were being hunted everywhere else. And so there'd be groups of 300. That gets a bit hairy when you encounter. It happened to us. We were climbing one tree and we were just about to hook ourselves onto the rope to get up. And then we just heard a stampede. There must have been a jaguar or something that was hunting them. The stampede just happened to come our way. And so we just had to just run as fast as we could, and we avoided them. But, again, like I said, they weren't going after us. They were just trying probably to run away from a predator themselves. I mean, the jaguars, you hear them, but rarely. I don't think I ever saw one. Crocodiles in the water. If you be careful if you want to go and have a dip in the river, just make sure there's no crocodiles in there. In Australia, also if you're by the sea. So yeah, it depends where you are.
Amazing. What great experiences. Am I right in thinking that you've worked with Francis Allais?
Yes, Francis Allais. Yeah, he...
Do you want to say who he is, perhaps? And yeah, our listeners might not have heard of him, but in the tree world, he's a real leader for certain ways of thinking about trees.
Yeah, he's one of the grandfathers, basically, of the studies of tree architecture and how trees branch and how they occupy space for different types of trees and different types of forests, how they adapt and build their structure. But in French Guyana, when I was collecting data for my PhD, he arrived with a film crew. They were filming for Once Upon a Forest. So he was there, and I was so excited because I've read his books and I've seen his amazing illustrations, because Francis is both his parents were artists, and so he's not only a fantastic scientist, he's actually a brilliant artist. So when he goes out into the field, he's always sketching. And so you go walking. So it's an experience to go out with him. I think he honed in with me my observational skills, that kind of paying attention to the big and the small, the big space that a tree takes up in its canopy. But then there's that pattern of branching, of how it splits up to go in different directions. And that's what I mean by big and small. Those work together. And then there's the leaves also. Where are they along the branching? So it was really fascinating to go out with him and just get this masterclass, of studying trees and observing trees. He goes out and he's very quiet in the forest, which I also like to be. That's how you get to see more of it. If you're not, screaming around, if you're not talking a lot and making a lot of noise, if you're doing that, things go away, animals and everything just tries to avoid you. So I like being quiet in the forest because then you get to see more of it. But that active observation, which I found really, really interesting.
Yeah, what you're describing reminds me of a saying, which is that we often look, but we rarely see. Yeah. And one of the things that it's often talked about that they were losing in the world is that direct experience with nature. So you and I both spent our childhoods in largely urbanized areas, and we were cut off from perhaps, the raw natural world in a way that people previously wouldn't have been. And it's really important we have people like yourself that, still take that time, hours, days, a lifetime, studying things in that depth.
I think with our modern culture that it's very fast. Everything is, the internet, and now with, apps, Instagram, TikTok, it's all tiny clips. But we also have to remember that kind of longer observation that is required to really dig into whatever topic that you want to study. Time, you need time. These things need time, and just like the trees need time to grow and flourish, whatever our knowledge also needs time to be collected, and that's what we try to do. That's what every researcher, I guess, I mean, if I may talk for other researchers, that is our job, to observe and record and analyze. In my case, it's the natural world, it's the forest, it's canopies. And I feel very privileged to be able to do that, to be able to spend my life doing that, furthering, the knowledge that we have about these, about trees and forests, on which we depend so much in so many different ways.
In some of these countries, we're losing rainforest at an alarming rate. And you've obviously been close to those places, and I'm sure looked into the societal incentives that mean that still happens. So what insight have you got about why that's still happening? Why is nobody stopping that happening?
That's a complicated question again, and it changes. The pressures on forest change on whatever part of the world you're in. But I think it basically comes down to this urbanization of humans, because we don't have them immediately in our environment. We might not value them because they're away. There's a distance. They're not immediate to us. Here in the UK, cities are a lot greener than in Mexico. I had some friends in Mexico that visited Oxford, and they were shocked that the parks were so big, that there were deer and cattle. There's some enclosures there for a rare breed of cattle that they have in some of the parks. And they were shocked. They were like, but this is a city. Why are they here? And I think this is part of, besides all the economic, pressures of transforming forest into arable land or farms or to grow grass for cattle or all that. Apart from those, it's that distance that we've made by building these cement cities, and where we haven't given enough space to plants. And so I think there's this disconnect in, how exactly we depend on them, and how really dependent we are on them. And that value, that lack of value, that kind of taken for granted, that they're there. And they have been there for a long time, but we've also been cutting them at unprecedented scales. If you're cutting trees that are 300 years old, God knows, 1,000 years old, it's like, oh, I hope not. But because of our short lifespans compared to them, there is also that disconnect that we don't realize the turnover, that what it is, the effect that when you cut down a 300-year-old tree, for another tree to get to fill that space, to fully, be a replacement, you need 300 years, and that's beyond our lifespan. And I think that is the other disconnect, where there is that lack of understanding that they're on a different timeline.
So the people making those big decisions are removed from what that even is. They don't really know what it is they're making decisions about.
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, our politics are looking short-term. Politicians, a lot of politicians, that they're trying to get reelected. And I don't know what would be the answer, but I think we need to somehow inject the long-term into our politics and our laws and our, conservation efforts and everything. We need to inject that long term.
We rely on trees to be the support system, but they also need a healthy support system, don't they?
Yeah, we need to give back. They give us a lot, and we need to learn to give back too.
Let's move on to the Scatter project. So that's how we met. Do you want to give a bit of background to that one, and what was that project all about, and where are you now with it?
The Scatter project is one of the most beautiful projects I've been involved in, and it's scanning ancient oaks with terrestrial LiDAR. I hadn't realized how special the UK is in terms of ancient trees. I believe it's the country, if not in the world, it's definitely in Europe, that has the most ancient trees. Our goal was, I think, 25. We ended up doing 40 something because we just loved it. And we had a northern route that went all the way to Scotland. And then we had a southern route that went all the way to Wales and also down to Cornwall. And we went and scanned some of the oldest ancient oaks. We decided to have a different diversity of settings and histories for these trees. So some were pollarded, have been historically pollarded. Some were maiden trees, which means that they've never been pollarded. And there's trees in a lot of different environments. Some are by rivers. Some are, the pampered royal oaks. One tree that I just fell in love with, that became the centerpiece of a council estate. And so you have these 800-year-old oak, and there's these rotunda, and there's houses, there's this council estate around it. And with my, with my experience as a child that I had to go and travel to get to trees, it was so beautiful to see this. And the community around this tree are super involved with this tree. There was a swing on it, and there was like a picnic table, and there were so many seedlings around this, around this tree. And it was just a happy place. You could see the tree was doing really well. This is one that has historically been pollarded. And then there is the public aim in this project, which is to create a digital archive that is open to everyone, for everyone to enjoy. It's a really good opportunity to get some of these images into museums, into natural history museums, where normally displays are based on fossils and taxidermy and where's the plants that they depend on and we all depend on. I find that as a forest specialist, something that is frustrating for me. I want to see more vegetation in those museums. And these lends itself for, high-tech displays. And then it also ties into the Woodland Trust has a project, Living Legends. And so they're trying to raise awareness of ancient trees, and they try to create a framework for protection. And so this project, these images are all in support of that campaign. Because I find it really ironic that, buildings that have been human-made, beautiful, of course, but much younger than, 200 years old, they have protection. And yet these living creatures that have been there and witnessed the history of this land have no protection whatsoever. I find that difficult to process. One of our oak trees, for example, it's got a very dramatic name of oak at the Gate of the Dead, and the name says a bit of its history. It was in Wales. It's in a valley in Wales, and it's I think in the 1600s. A very bloody battle happened all around this tree, and they say that the ground was running with blood all around this tree, and that blood fed that land on which this tree is growing and still growing. And it's the only witness to this, living witness to that history. And I just think that should be protected.
I was one of the people that got to try out the VR experience that your scanning project has made possible. I met an ancient oak tree, Majesty it was called, and never met that tree. And genuinely, it gave me a tingle down my spine when I was in that experience. So there's hope there that we can bring those types of experiences to people that perhaps can't access them in other places, and hopefully keep that appreciation alive. And that will definitely help to do so. And I'm excited to see how you bring that forward in that project. In rounding up this interview then, Cecilia, can you tell me what would be your ideal vision for the future when it comes to trees?
I think a closer relationship. I think urban forests, coming from my background, I initially was a bit reluctant. Urban forests. But then with my experience as a child, I was like, wow, why hadn't I paid more attention to that? Of course, urban trees, that connection between our urban lives with the natural environment needs to be closer. And I think I would like to see, of course, all the conservation and, rewilding and expanding forests. Yes, that work has to be done. But there is also that opportunity of bringing the trees a lot more into the urban space. Just start putting trees everywhere in cities where we took them out. They belong there too. They belong all around us. You're here, you came here to visit me for this recording. And I don't know if you noticed, we live on a tree-lined avenue.
I did, yeah.
Yes. Well, that's why we live in this house. And then 3 blocks away, there's 3 parks. And that is the reason why we live here. This is why we chose our home, the location. And I think that connection, there's a lot to be learned there, of having a lot more green around us. I was watching Monty Don on a program and on the BBC. He's going through Spain, looking at gardens in Spain. And there was a wonderful project where there's this school where the children are actively involved in growing the vegetables that go into their lunch. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, this connection where you don't even have to explain it. It's like, it's as simple as growing a tomato so you can have lunch, right? I would like to see a lot more urban greening and stop all of that cutting of trees. We've had here in Plymouth, and you hear it, more and more. We have to stop that. The few trees that we have in the urban space, please don't cut them. Bring more in. And I think that makes itself, sharing the space with trees and vegetation, I think it does the job. It explains itself in a way.
This has been a great chat, and I'm really grateful for all that you've shared in this one. And I'm going to hand to you now for a final thought for our listeners. Over to you, Cecilia.
I think it's as simple as spend time around trees. Take a little bit of time to go and sit under a tree. And there's a lot to be enjoyed about, something that is actively growing, and get involved in growing things. It's a really satisfying thing to do, to kind of plant a seed. And it's almost magical, it's like seeds are just potential. They're just right there, just capsules of potential. And then you put it on the ground, add water, and voila, something grows, green comes out. And then you might get a tomato out of it. And you might get, a chili. In Mexico, we have plants, that we can eat, that are going in. Normally, there's some chili plants, and there's papaya, and there's avocado. If you're lucky to have a garden big enough to get an avocado tree going. It's so powerful to know that you can do that. You can grow something from a tiny seed. It's a little bit of everyday magic, I think.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And see you next time.